Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Vision Europe Dialogue. A special thanks, of course, to Mr. Alexander Stubb, Vice President of the European Investment Bank, for being with us to kick off this dialogue event. Welcome to our online viewers as well, who are joining us through the live stream for this session. It's truly a pleasure to have some of the brightest minds from Europe here in Helsinki today to discuss and find common ground on the issue of a fair data economy. Leading European think tanks, foundations, and networks of expertise, such as the ones represented here, play an important role in taking this agenda forward. And what is this agenda that we challenge you on today? Making Europe a pioneer in fair data economy. Since 2015, Vision Europe network partners from 8 countries across the continent have together aimed to increase knowledge and impact policymaking on pressing European-wide issues. Each year, the Vision Europe network has tackled a new issue. In 2015, in Berlin, it was the future of the welfare state. In 2016, in Lisbon, the European migration crisis. And in 2017, in Turin, the winners and losers of globalization. Last year, in 2018, we gathered in conjunction with the Global Think Tank Summit in Brussels. As you can tell, these are thought-provoking issues on a very grand scale. Our cooperation across Europe has certainly strengthened our sense of shared values and the need for us to come together and understand and find solutions to very complex issues in an ever-increasingly unpredictable environment. In 2019, in addition to a new theme, data economy, the Vision Europe network is also here to test a new concept, a dialogue concept, as a framework for our discussions. You will hear more details about this dialogue concept after the opening session. In a nutshell, the idea behind this is that the methods and means that we choose to share our knowledge and expertise are as important as the knowledge and expertise itself. In a way, the setup of the little chairs in these dialogue form also gives you a bit of a flavor in terms of the reflective small groups that will be happening throughout the next 24 hours. So my name is Heidi, and together with my colleague Marcus, we'll be acting as the moderators of the event today and tomorrow. I work as a senior lead in Citra's foresight and strategy team, and my role there is to coordinate these Vision Network activities. We'll go through the program and the dialogue concept in more detail after the opening, but let's start painting the big picture now before we get going. Marcus?
Yes, indeed. A warm welcome from me as well, and great to have you all here. My name is Markus Kalliola, and I work as a senior lead for the Fair Data Economy project. Now, I feel really passionate about this project and this topic, and I'm really looking forward for all the different viewpoints that we have for this topic within this next day or two. Now, it is a crucial time for Europe as we convene here today. This year, we will shape the future of Europe for years to come. Not only the EU elections and the new Commission, a budget for years to come, also Brexit negotiations. But for us Finns, it's a really special year, especially because we are hosting the EU presidency for the second half of the year. Plus that, we have local political parliament elections this spring. So I would call it a super year for Finland, but also for EU. As Heidi said, we will get back to the program within an hour, but before that, now we start heading to the keynote speeches. They will help us to paint the big picture about fair data economy for us. Before the keynote speak from Alex Stubb, I would like to now invite to the stage the president of Sitra, Mikko Kosonen. Both keynote speeches will preface the following dialogue session. I just want to highlight one more thing. After Alex's speech, you will have a possibility to ask questions for 10 minutes before Alex heads to the airport. So please take that opportunity and use it. Also, during Alex's speech, the speech will be graphically illustrated to the wall. So that will be something new for Alex as well. Anyway, Mikko, please now, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Markus and Heidi. Dear members of the Vision Europe Network, our guests, colleagues, people watching online, heartily welcome to the Vision Europe Dialogue event, first of its kind. Vision Europe network, as Heidi was saying, is a consortium of 8 European think tanks collaborating to address public policy challenges in Europe. This event today and tomorrow is our opportunity to do exactly that. And instead of just listening, you will all get to participate. We have handpicked each of you in this room to address this grand challenge of ours. It's crucial that you are actively participating with us. Thank you for the opportunity to share your knowledge with us. We are really counting on you. So, dear friends, it's the eve of European Parliament elections, and there is certainly no lack for challenges for Europe. But we are not here to discuss Brexit, immigration, transatlantic relations, populism, elections to come, or any other hot topic that we are facing. We are here to discuss something which impacts our everyday life and will largely determine the well-being and growth of Europe for decades to come. We are here to discuss no more than human-centric data economy. Unfortunately, our current situation in Europe is not very good at this stage. Our market share in the so-called platform economy is 4%. US having nearly 2/3, China 1/3. Luckily, we are ahead of Africa, but just barely. From the largest 10 corporations in the world, only one is not a technology company, and none of the top 10 are European. The largest corporations all have one thing in common. They have understood the importance of data, and more interestingly, personal data. But that's where all the commonalities end. Data economy is being built differently around the world. Let us next look at some of the future data economy scenarios as we see them in Sitra. In the Big Brother scenario on the top left corner, countries and regions restrict internet and strong regional rules exist, as we can see in China and Saudi Arabia today. Security and control are driving forces, and sharing data between services is limited. But government and parties close to it use a lot of citizen personal data for purposes we don't exactly know and trust. Moving down to the broken data economy scenario, constant security breaches and personal data leakages have led to the loss of trust. Internet services as we know them today are not secure, and individuals are no longer present as themselves, but rather through proxies. Regulators have lost control, and trusted services exist outside the open internet. On the bottom right, we have the scenario that is closest to our current situation in the US and in Europe today. In this silo scenario, privacy rules are vague, and businesses can decide what to do with the data they acquire from people, as long as people choose to consume the services which are mostly given them for free. Businesses are global, economy of scale leads to winner takes it all market. Regulators are weak compared to global giants in this scenario. Finally, we have the fair data economy scenario, where people are in control of their data and services. Businesses need to compete to keep consumers happy and are in constant competition to serve well and to be trusted. Strong regulation exists to secure people and data moves between ecosystems with the consent of the individual. Dear friends, in Sitra, we definitely believe in this last fourth human-centric fair data economy scenario. We believe that we as individuals, instead of businesses or governments, should be in control of our own personal data. To make this real, we have started a project called IHAN, I-H-A-N, International Human Account Number. This project aims to build the foundation for fair and functioning data economy starting from Europe. The main objectives are to create a method for data exchange and to set European-level rules and guidelines for ethical use of data. In fact, I just heard this morning that Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook agrees with this need, and US is also driving for their own GDPR in the future. So that's an interesting, very positive development. We aim to take the debate on data economy to the table of decision makers in politics, public sector, and private businesses, not forgetting the most important, which is, of course, the individuals. One example of this work of ours is in your hands here today. A copy soon to be published discussion paper on fair data economy. We interviewed a wide range of experts throughout Europe and decision makers for it. And in January, we published the results of an international survey including more than 8,000 Europeans. I believe that we now have a solid idea of what both decision makers in Europe and decision makers and citizens in Europe really want. The voice is loud and clear. We want our data to be built on trust. But as a think and do tank, we in Sitra, we don't leave it here. We have started concrete pilot projects to test our ideas in practice. Our pilot projects are being implemented as we speak now across Europe in multiple sectors of society, from defense forces to top Olympic athletes, and from music industry to diabetes patients, all the way to agriculture and precision farming. Dear friends, the way forward should be based on European values. We should be able to trust the internet services which utilize our data. With GDPR, we now have a solid foundation for this. So our main question for today and going forward is, how can we build a fair data economy which is as competitive as any other model and can prevail in and become the dominant model for the next decades to come? Looking at the list of participants here today and you, I'm pretty sure that we all share the same ambition. Therefore, I'm really looking forward to the next 24 hours that we can build a consensus and a strong foundation for going forward. So once more, welcome to our session. And it's now my honor and pleasure to introduce our actual keynote speaker, Alex Stubb, our previous kind of prime minister and currently vice president of the European Investment Bank. And as we remember, European Investment Bank was founded to build Europe based on common values and cohesion. So Alex, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thanks, Mikko, and thank you to Sitra very much for the invitation. I like that, kind of former prime minister. I think it's pretty good because I've always said, and I've done this joke a few times with my former colleagues, and one was actually with Theresa May around. I went to the European Council a bit afterwards and said, you know what the best working title in the world is? I said, no, what? Former prime minister. And then you look at the faces of the colleagues, they're starting to immediately think, when am I former? But it is a truly, privilege and honor to be here today. And one of the best things of being former something is that you have a hell of a lot more time to read. And what I'll do today is to try to give you a former legislator's helicopter view about the digital revolution, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, the combination of biology and technology, robotization. What should a legislator, perhaps a doer rather than a thinker, in this particular case do? And I'll do it by having an introduction and then making 3 points, and then finally trying to make some conclusions about what Europe should do. And I actually have 5 concrete proposals for that. But in order for us to get going, if you only remember one thing from this talk today, it would be my claim that the digital revolution as we know it will change everything. It'll change, more specifically, 3 things. Number 1, the economy and the way in which we work. Number 2, politics and media. Number 3, science and the future of mankind. In the early 20th century, we were grappling with enormous issues linked to the first industrial revolution. And in the aftermath, or in conjunction with the first industrial revolution, came Marxism. We're now in the fourth industrial revolution, and we don't really know what's knocking on the door. So I'll make 3 helicopter views. The first one is, how is the digital revolution going to change the economy and the future of work? I'll try to drop in 1 book per session. In other words, 1 per point. The one I would drop here is Brynjolfsson and McAfee, who'd written a few books together, but the latest one I really like, and it's called Machine, Platform and Crowd. The basic argument, of course, here is that the digital revolution will change the way in which the logic and the logistics of our economy works. Mikko mentioned in his intro that only 4% of platform businesses are in Europe, 2/3 in the US. I don't know what the exact ratio it is, but it's quite clear that we're now moving more and more towards the types of services that are provided for on platforms. We have Uber represented here, Facebook was mentioned earlier, Google, Amazon, and obviously the list goes on. So a platform provider will most probably be the key. At the same time, we're moving towards an economy where you and I will need most probably less and less brain power to use the type of mundane thinking that can now be done by machines. Now, what I wanted to put in here is that a lot of people are extremely afraid of what this transition will mean. And I try to be a little bit more optimistic. You know, Europe has never had more employment than what we have at this particular moment. And I would actually argue that instead of seeing work, either blue collar or white collar, as a zero-sum game, we need to see it as something which is, I'd argue, much more creative than that. You and I simply do not know what the job market is going to look like in 10 years, 20 years, let alone 50 years. A lot of the public debate that we have and a lot of the talk that we hear from politicians is basically about blue-collar jobs being lost through, say, robotization, assembly lines, factories, and so on and so forth, taxis, lorries, trains, even airplanes. I don't think that's going to be really the case only. It will change the way in which blue-collar work is done, but as a matter of fact, it's as much white-collar as anything. The example that I could give is an X-ray specialist, a doctor, or the one I always give to my wife, who is a lawyer, is obviously law. Latest example, you give a legal contract, and this is a true example, to 2 top lawyers and a machine. The legal contract is 2 to 3 pages long, and the 2 entities are asked to make a comparison, find the mistakes. The 2 top lawyers take 1.5 hours and find 85% of the mistakes in the legal contract. The machine finds 95% of the mistakes, but it takes 22 seconds. Now, am I trying to say that AI is going to basically make all lawyers redundant? No, I'm not. But what I'm trying to say is that it will change the way in which we work now and in the future. And the big question, I think, for legislators is on how to provide the transition in this particular phase when we're moving to different types of ways of working. Yuval Harari, his words, talks a lot about the creation of a useless class. In other words, human beings who do not have economic or political value. And that scares the living daylights out of me, because I personally believe that every human being has a value in and of themselves. The easy thing for Marxism was to do was to address the issue of workers' rights, working time, pensions, healthcare, etc. What do we do in a situation where the economy does not necessarily need worker X, Y, and Z? I think this becomes a huge issue. So that's why I think for any legislator, be it regional, national, or European, you must start addressing these issues, I would argue, before it's too late. Some would, of course, say that we got Brexit and Trump because of technological advancement, because of globalization, and because of the fears that that brought with it. Now, if we don't address this, I think it's going to get much worse. My second point today is that the digital revolution is not only going to change the economy and work as we know it, it is also going to change politics and media. And here, the book that I would like to drop is the latest book from Yuval Harari. I loved Homo Sapiens, Homo Deus a little bit less, but 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, I think is a good summary which addresses a lot of the issues linked to democracy, the future of politics, and media. So my argument is that technology will change politics and media as we know it. Now, I belonged to the, what would you say, probably tech optimists who believe that with the empowerment of media, be that in the beginning internet, moving into blogs, open blogs, social media, I felt very strongly that this means the on-march and onslaught of what I would call digital democracies. Arab Spring was a good example of this. We felt very strongly that we're starting to see democratic movements and freedom in many ways being sprinkled around the world. Remember, going back to Marx's time, early 20th century, there were 5 to 10 democracies in the world. By the end of the century, approximately 100. And all of us started to believe in a Fukuyama-esque end of history type of thinking that all nation states will move towards the triple whammy of liberal democracy, social market economy, and globalization. But obviously this didn't happen. And some would argue that we're actually, in some cases, moving towards digital dictatorships rather than digital democracies. And here we're coming to the classic, I'd say, George Orwell 1984 versus Aldous Huxley, Brave New World type of thinking. What is the technological empowerment going to do to us? Are we going towards Big Brother watching us, China type of states? Or are we moving towards Brave New World, let's laugh ourselves to death through technological development and entertainment? I really don't know, but we are right now in a transition phase, which of course has a huge impact on the free world and actually free media and democracy. I mean, look at election results in Europe, I'd say ever since the beginning of the financial crisis. The Finnish elections were mentioned here earlier. I think in many ways that was an embryo to what we got later. 2011, extremely messy election results. And now we're starting to see very divided and split societies, not because of technology, but the way in which technology is used. And then it becomes an issue between free speech and fake speech. And we're trying to find some kind of a middle way to a certain extent, the way in which you promote true facts and issues without them spinning out of control through Twitter or other means. And I do say here, and I say this very gently because the last thing you want to do as an ex-politician is to criticize the media. But we have to be very careful. This is not only a phenomenon of social media. This is also a phenomenon of mainstream media and, more importantly, it's a phenomenon of mainstream politics. So the question is, how do we find responsible free speech, responsible communication, and responsible use of modern technology? I think this is going to be an extremely important transition as well. I'm sure it will rectify itself at the end of the day, but right now we do feel like we're in a cacophony of technological democracy which seems to be problematic. I don't need to mention Brexit just as one example, but obviously here we're seeing democracy in many ways in crisis, partly because of technological development. My final and third point today is an argument is that I think the digital revolution will change science and mankind. I'll drop 2 books here. One is Max Tegmark, Life 3.0, and the other one is Yuval Harari's first and second book, Homo Sapiens and Homo Deus. Here the argument is quite clear. Now, we all love the advancement of medicine, obviously. Healthy, long, happy lives. Life expectancy of my children born early 2000 is 105 to 110. Medicine will probably push that forward. And it is wonderful that at some stage an amputated arm can be replaced with an arm which basically will work like a normal arm and most probably be in one way or another getting commands from a neural lace. Okay, it does get a little bit problematic if that neural lace gets a cyber attack and you start hitting yourself or shooting someone else. But the bottom line is that the development of medicine and science is phenomenal at this particular stage. But it does not go without ethical implications, because now we are already at a stage where biology and technology can be combined in such a way that we can start manipulating DNA, we can start meddling with an unborn child with embryos, genome sequencing. And then if we have always made the claim that all human beings are born equal, which is a questionable claim, but at least should be a starting point. It of course depends on the environment that you're born into. But what if we get into a stage whereby human beings can be given different types of characteristics before they are born? For me, we can shrug our shoulders and say, well, so be it. But that is basically the epitome, I would argue, of an unequal society, because obviously this would not come without a cost when you start building types of superhumans that have often been discussed. So against this background, I would say that it's very important to start tackling this issue and working on international treaties, links to ethics. So my 3 points before the conclusion is to say that the economy and work will change, politics and media will change, and science and mankind will change. And then I come to my conclusion, and before I make my 5 proposals for the vision of Europe, I'd like to make 2 points before that. The first one is that Max Tegmark's book has a wonderful introduction where it says we have 3 ways of approaching this issue. Number 1 is that we are tech optimists and basically let all the markets run rampant and believe that technology, big tech companies and others will rectify themselves at the end of the day. I've also heard it explained as open internet, decentralized, free, Silicon Valley-esque in some cases. The second approach is to be a tech pessimist and basically say that, well, don't worry about it. You're talking, Alex, about neural laces. These things are not going to be real for another 50 years. Might as well just go ahead and live a normal life. You're talking about self-driving cars. That's all good and well, but don't believe anyone who says that you will not be allowed to drive a car in 2050 because you will be a liability to road traffic. As a matter of fact, it's going to be much slower than that. And yes, the game Go was fine, Jeopardy fine, Kasparov fine, but the truth is that, machine learning, self-learning, we're still really far away, and the tipping point ain't going to be here. So don't worry about it. The last one is, the third option is what has been called benign AI, which I think you explained in your matrix as a fourth one, fair AI or fair data. And I would argue that, and I would guess that probably all the people in this room belong to that category. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So optimist, pessimist, or benign AI. But then we come to my second point before the conclusions. Who is going to be in the driver's seat in this? Is it going to be China? Is it going to be the United States? Or is it going to be the European Union? And I think it's a big issue. Simple reason, for the Chinese, for Confucius, the approach to data and the sharing of big data is different from the way in which we see it here in Europe. I'll be honest, when I hear and read about applications that do social ranking, it scares the shit out of me, because it's one of the most fundamental intrusions that you can have on privacy. When your character is not judged by another human being who you're meeting, not even by the way in which you behave on social media, but on algorithms which decide on your loans, on your cars, on your shopping, based on your training, and the rest of it. Then we're starting to approach, I think, a moment in the development of mankind where George Orwell gets quite prevalent in this. Now, the US, the second option, I wouldn't be too worried about it. I mean, the Americans, as a matter of fact, you talked about European values. I actually think that Americans, for all intents and purposes, share the broad Western and European values that we have. You might not agree with the current administration, but if you look at the basic tech, yes, there are some differences on the way in which the economy around data is run, but the bottom line is still focused on privacy rather than communal control. And in that sense, I wouldn't be excessively worried if the Americans take a certain lead, which they have already on the technological side and the development of various forms of data. And then, of course, the third one is the European Union. And here, I have a special place for this continent. And as a matter of fact, I hesitate to say this, but we are a regulatory superpower. Some people like it, others don't. But this means that we know how to deal with these types of issues. The three elements I mentioned, China, the US, and Europe, are of course different. China is a one-party, centralized, controlled state. The United States is a two-party, divided and right now extremely polarized state. Europe is a multi-party, multilateral state. In the United States, well, in China, you have the art of authority. In the United States, you have the art of the deal. In Europe, you have the art of the compromise. And I'm really looking forward to the stuff that's coming from the Ala-Pietilä report on the 9th of April on what Europe can actually do in terms of the art of compromise in this field. My 5 concluding points, as time has run out, are the following. What should Europe do? Number 1, Europe should concretely cooperate with the United States. Right now, the feeling of the US administration is, to put it mildly, lukewarm. Right now, the feeling of the transatlantic relationship is rather cool. But I think the European Union and the United States should find ways and means to cooperate when it comes to the digital revolution, be that AI, be that robotization, or be that data. Number 2, I think Europe should continue to regulate and work on the basis of competition law as stands currently. There might be a sense to start changing it a little bit, but I talked about a regulatory superpower earlier, about antitrust. What the European Union is trying to do with some of the tech giants right now, I think is the right thing to do, whether it's Google, whether it's Amazon, or Apple. Now, some people feel that they're trying to encroach on innovation. I disagree. They're trying to create competition. Number 3, I think the European Union needs to focus on innovation. And I know it's a bit of a cliche to say, but there are elements and instruments for this. Of course, I shouldn't make a commercial break for the European Investment Bank, which is the biggest multilateral bank in the world, which puts about 20-25% of its annual 80 billion euros of financial instruments into innovation, but push it forward, make it conducive, have enough venture capital for the system to start working here. And believe me, as a wannabe banker, I've looked at a lot of companies close up, and there is, I would argue, quite good news about innovation in Europe in general. So don't get too pessimistic about us being completely left behind. Number 4 is regulation. I mentioned that we are a regulatory superpower. I remember a lot of people were critical about the GDPR. I'm sure I was as well. But immediately after what happened with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, and from what we now hear, noises from Facebook, a lot of companies are saying, well, in terms of privacy, it's quite okay. Then we come to the question, does it need to be updated? The answer to that is yes, it does. It's probably already awfully old-fashioned, and I don't know whether traditional European regulation will work on this. You know, directives or regulations, should we just go more and more towards best practices and frameworks? I don't know, but it is something that the next European Commission needs to be dealing with. The final and 5th point I have on this is on ethics. I mentioned the issues of science and the future of mankind. I'd much rather that it's the good guys rather than the bad guys doing the algorithms in this field. And I think it's very important that the European Union takes a lead on this, of course together with the UN and the rest of it. But it's important to get it right from the beginning. When you talk about AI, it's as big as trade in human organs. It's as big as biological warfare. When we're starting to talk about autonomous weapons, etc., etc., a lot of work to be done. I'll finish off with this and say, the next Commission, because I think we can only look 5 years ahead, the next Commission should have 2 things that it focuses on. Number 1 is a combination of AI, data, and robotization. That needs to be like the new, I don't want to use the term internal market because it's so old-fashioned, but we must have a first vice president who is in charge of this field. And secondly, of course, linked to this is climate change. And these 2 can be worked together. So this is my short introduction. I find it a fascinating subject, and I hope that a lot of current and future legislators understand what it's all about. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for that big picture and also the little picture that we have from your speech back there.
I always look at those afterwards.
Back there as well. Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions from the audience, and for our online viewers as well, there's actually a chance for you to ask questions to the online system if you'd like to, but yeah, make use of the opportunity. We have the microphone here so we can make sure we link it online as well.
Just raise your hand.
Usually the non-Finnish audience is much quicker to ask questions and make some
I think
noise.
we have first here from Lucas Ilves.
Great.
Please introduce yourself quickly and then ask your question.
Lucas Ilves from the Lisbon Council think tank in Brussels. You talked at the very end about wanting to have AI that the good guys have made. But you didn't talk in your recommendations about what we can actually do to get Europe to use this technology more. And I just wonder, more a personal reflection, not just a policymaker reflection, a lot of that is up to leadership. Private sector, public sector, you've had to work with both, giving money to companies big and small. What can we do to get Europe's CEOs, Europe's C-suite, you know, in the legacy companies that really need to be adopting these technologies to have a little bit more of a fire under their behind and actually get with the program? Because sometimes it seems like they're quite comfortable where things are.
I think the first, it's a very good question. I think the first thing we need to do is a generational shift. I'll be very frank with you. You know, my kids are, as I said, 17 and 15, and the element of tech savviness is just on a completely different planet than my generation, let alone the older generation. I think, to be honest, and I don't mean this in a bad way, Europe has for too long been led by mostly grey old men, and that has then a reflection on the policy making by and large. Of course, then there are innovative places, there are innovative countries. There are countries where you have a good startup scene, you have a lot of technological development. I'm not denying that. But in many ways, if and when I have been talking a lot about regulation, then you need to have regulators who understand, what artificial intelligence is or what robotization is, what data means. Now, I'm a big fan of Jean-Claude Juncker, right? Because I think he's done a great job in this commission. There's no question about it with the immigration crisis, the Euro crisis, Brexit and Trump. At the same time, Jean-Claude Juncker still has an old Nokia. Now, I respect that, and I really appreciate his commitment. And of course, he has it so that no one can tap into his phone. But the bottom line is that I hope the next president of the European Commission is tech savvy. And a good start is to use a smartphone. Still use a Nokia, that as well.
Okay, happy birthday, first of all, Alex.
Thank you. It's not a joke.
My name is Katja Lehto. I come from Brussels, from the European Trade Union Confederation. Thank you very much for your presentation, Alex. And of course, I'm very interested also about the future works and future jobs, and of course thinking about the future generations and the young people there. Of course, you mentioned that unemployment has come down. That's very good. But anyway, we have 25% of a very inactive population still in Europe. So I wonder if you want to say something about this unskilling of skilling of people. And then second thing, digitalization. I just went by a post office this morning and sent a post package to Oulu. And they answered me, well, this costs $5.90 if you send it by internet. But I said I had to hurry up to Sitra seminar, so then I paid $9.50. So the question of digitalization, splitting society to people who can digitalization and the other part which maybe cannot. So if you have any remarks on that. And lastly, and third point concerning the care sector problems today in Finland, and digitalization and all of this, and same time we will still have human beings, and you talked about human values, and so my question is that how do you see anything that can be also done by digitalization to help also this kind of aspects in the future generations and for taking care of elder people? Thank you very much.
Well, thanks. I'll try to combine the three questions into one. I mean, the way in which I would like for us to think is disruptive and outside the box. Obviously, we're going to be at a stage when Mikko is going to buy his sneakers in the future on the net, not only as a physical element, but printing them on a 3D printer. And that will, of course, revolutionize the way in which we transfer things and move things around. That's why, in a little parenthesis, I've always said that for the UK to leave the European Union is a little bit like leaving the internet. You can do it, but it's probably smarter to try to influence it. And I think that's the type of mentality we should have. We will also have physical goods being transferred by drones and in other ways. I look at the shopping behavior of my kids nowadays. They feel it's quite old-fashioned actually to go to a physical store. So that will change things. My big point today was that the transition from a physical economy and a physical world to a more digital world will take time, and it will not go without problems. However, and this is my final point on this, a lot of youngsters and youngsters' parents ask me, if you were, the youngster would say, my age, say 18, what would you study? And I try to tell them three things. The first thing that they should work on is analytic skills. In other words, trying to get your brain to work in a fashion where you're not trying to memorize things, but putting things together, trying to get the big picture in. And the argument is, of course, that their working career is going to be very different from mine. They're not going to be only a political scientist or only a doctor, etc. They're probably going to have a whole bunch of different jobs throughout their careers, and many of them they will probably keep short-term or simultaneously. The second thing I want them to learn is linked to actually healthcare and care of the elderly, is empathy. And this is a good thing for us here in Finland to remember as well. I think as we move more and more towards a society where robots and machines can take care of a lot of the mundane tasks, we're going to be left with a lot of face-to-face time with other human beings. And I think the youngster that learns the skill of empathy from the beginning, not only coder or number cruncher and so on and so forth, will go quite far in life. So if he or she can analyze and then be empathetic, that's a good start. The third thing I tell them to do goes a little bit beyond, but given that we have the means, I think a lot of youngsters need to learn how to take care of themselves. And that means a combination of training your mind and training your body for all of your life. And I say all of your life because your career and my career is going to be different from the career of these youngsters who now might be unemployed. But the career path of you and I, or Pekka and I, has been very clear. Study, work, and retire. Yeah? Now, in the future, it's going to be study, work, study some more, work, study, die. I mean, that's how it's going to go. And if you don't take care of yourself, and if you believe that society will take care of you instead, then I think you're going to run into trouble. So I hope that nudges you in the right direction a little bit.
Alex, thanks for great insight. My name is Pekka Ala-Pietilä. My question relates to investment. You have had a special insight from the nation-state perspective, from Commission perspective, and now from the bankers' perspective, covering the whole Europe. And if we look the investment, now we put China aside because they overinvest to a degree which is difficult even to imagine. But even with US, it's 1 to 8. So US 1, US 8, Europe 1 in multiple dimensions. And if UK is leaving, then for the continental Europe it's 1 to 12 probably. Commission has a, I would say, great aspiration to invest 20 billion on an annual basis since 2021, but that's highly leveraged. It's 1 from Commission or from the EU and the 9, exactly, and then the 9 from industries. And if we don't get the investments in place, I feel that many of those things we could do would be highly jeopardized. And that is probably one of my biggest concerns, that alignment we need to find a way to put in place.
I think you're absolutely right, and I hope that we find that line of thinking in your paper published on the 9th of April as well. My take is simple. It's going to be a very granular investment package. That means that we need to see investments coming from the private sector. We need to see investments coming from the national sector, and then of course from the European as well. What we try to do in the EIB is to be comfortably between the public sector and the and the private sector, which basically means that given that we are a AAA rated bank owned by the 28 member states, and we have capital of 250 billion euros, assets of 600 billion, we have some euros to play with. And what we try to do is, of course, when we go into a project, to crowd in as much investment as possible. So my message is that what we do in the bank is the leveraging business, whether it's through the Juncker plan or what they now are going to call the InvestEU. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to do, because at some stage European leaders understood that subsidies, grants, they're not going to be the way forward. So the way in which you need to do is to try to come in and crowd in the money from the private sector. But you're absolutely right, we're going to need a hell of a lot more on this. But then nation states must also understand that a lot of this leadership can be taken by the European Union.
Question and a quick answer, and then
Sure.
we need to stop.
Yeah, my name is Aarten Geus, Bertelsmann Stiftung. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, very structured and I think very helpful. So, thank you very much. On the agenda that you set out for Europe, the 5 points: cooperate with the US, competition law, innovation, data protection, and ethic of algorithms. I can see how that deals with the challenges for the economy and the future of work, and how it deals with the challenges for, so to say, science and life. But does it also deal with the second area, So the challenges in the world of politics and media, and I did not yet connect the agenda of the 5 points to the challenges in that area.
It's a very good question. I'm trying, as a sort of recovering and ex-politician, I'm trying to stay away a little bit from that field, and not least because we have elections in 2 weeks, so I don't want people to misunderstand. I think a couple of points on that very quickly. The first one is, I think some of the ideas actually that were put forward by President Macron were not bad. In other words, the idea of trying to protect democracy and find a way of doing it. We have to be very careful when we do that, because we don't want, big brother democracy. But what I actually think will, at the end of the day, hopefully save Western democracy from the pendulum swinging in the authoritarian, nationalistic direction at this particular moment, is answers to the most pressing problems of society at the moment. One of them is technological development. People don't say it out loud because, and if you look at Donald Trump, he was criticizing the immigrant, not technology, for taking jobs. But if we don't address that, then I think democracy is going to suffer. The final point I have on this, it's very, not simplistic, but it's the big picture. If I was a dictator in Europe, I would try to develop a Nordic welfare state or Nordic welfare model for Europe. And my basic thinking is simple. I think the economy has been very good at baking the cake, at increasing the size of the economy by and large. But politics has been extremely bad at distributing it in a fair and equal way. And if we don't succeed in doing that, then we might go back to the horrific events of the beginning of the 20th century when world wars broke out. If you have a frustrated middle class, it's going to be very difficult to have functioning democracy.
Okay, thank you once more.
Thank you.
And we'll let you get to the airport now, and we'll continue with the rest of our program. But thank you
Thanks.
for being with us. Okay, and thank you to the online viewers as well. You're welcome to join us again tomorrow at 12:15 for the closing panel. All right.